and
sorry, Rupert, carry on.
Yeah. Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to give a bit of background about my own journey in the bus industry, because I'm a bit of a shy and recluse type. I don't go in for lots of PR about myself. So I thought there would be an element where that would be interesting to kick off things before I talk a bit more about what's been going on in the last 18 months and how COVID has had such an impact on us in Stagecoach and the customers and the people that are interacting with us. So I grew up in Poole in Dorset, and from a really early age, I had this real fascination with how transport worked, how it all pieced together, how services interacted with one another, and just the whole logistics of what happened. And whilst at school I was a sort of do minimum to get a pass, when I chose to do a transport degree in Swansea, and it was at that point where I just knew the transport was for me. And in my holidays, I was fortunate to get a bit of work experience at Wilts and Dorset, and I just said, "Oh, can I come in for free and just help out?" And I did for a couple of weeks, one in my first holiday, and then they asked me back and actually wanted to pay me to help and do different things. So I got the chance to experience things mostly in the schedules team, where at that stage they still did things on paper. So it was a great learning experience for me and set me up for lots of the other things that I did in the future. But it was a great introduction, and at that time they were still owned by the original management team that bought the business from National Bus Company, and it was just a fascinating period of time to work for them, even if it was just for me, a summer holiday job that gave me some experience and a bit of extra cash in my pocket to pay for uni. Getting towards the end of my degree, I applied to all the major groups across the UK, and I was really lucky to be offered a couple of different significant options. Although, and I hope this doesn't bode well for me, National Express actually turned me down. So we'll see what happens over the next few months with that one. I started with Stagecoach on their training scheme in Cambridge, and as soon as I got my bus license, we were so short of staff in that era that I spent most of my first year doing lots of driving around the city, which I absolutely loved. I mean, it was just fascinating at that time to get involved and do driving and see what it was like. And as part of that first year, I spent time doing all sorts of jobs in the depot, whether it was inspecting vehicles alongside some of the fitter team, fueling vehicles, inspector duties, and part of the recruitment and cash office, everything you can imagine that goes on in a bus company. And then I continued my training in Chesterfield and then Hull to complete my first couple of years, and latterly in Hull, that was my first sort of role as an assistant ops manager. And just even in my time in Chesterfield, it was brilliant to get involved in a network change, doing the analysis of what needed to be done. At that time, the local town network hadn't really been reviewed following the takeover of Chesterfield Transport in the 90s. And it was great to have just a really good go at reorganizing that network and doing the analysis, and then going to the customers and all the staff internally to share what those plans were and put that new network into place. Now, probably 99 out of 100 people that go into a bus company as a trainee manager end up being an ops manager. But I had an unexpected career path, and that was to go into the commercial manager role, which was my first job at Stagecoach West in 2003. And this, I think that some people had seen that I had a talent for some of the network design, local authority liaison. And so that was great for me to get involved in that side. And it was a small team at Stagecoach West at that time. And so alongside one other person, I got involved in everything, whether it was programming ticket machines, doing the network design, talking to the local authorities, and that led on to things like the concessions and introduction of the free concession scheme in 2006, and working on budgets and all those sorts of things. And it was a fantastic period of time when we were looking for growth, and getting some good expansion in the business. Not long after, Stagecoach bought Yorkshire Traction Group from well, again, that was the original National Bus Company management team, Frank Carter. I applied and got the commercial director job at Stagecoach Yorkshire. Boy, was that a tough job. At the beginning, everything needed attention. It was a company where the reliability wasn't very good latterly. I think they'd managed to buy every type of bus that was ever conceived at that time. And we just needed to focus on everything. And the starting point from my point of view was working on how we could improve reliability, improve the customer offer, concentration on routes that would actually at least break even or make a small profit. And so we moved away from schools, particularly at peak times. We had a big job in Huddersfield to reorganise that, and then latterly sold that to Centrebus and Arriva. We introduced things like the free child concession scheme in Barnsley, which at that time was quite an unusual scheme for children to travel for free. And then the other fascinating bit for me was that competition in Sheffield, where when Stagecoach first took on the Sheffield Terrier operation, I think we were carrying something like 6 million passenger journeys, and that was a very small market share, less than 10% of the bus usage in Sheffield. And by 2012, we managed to get that up to 19 million passenger journeys in Sheffield, which was an extraordinary period of growth. And obviously working with the Supertram, which was an established Stagecoach business, it meant that we could develop some unique things like the Sheffield Supertram link services, and the whole competition dynamic was just brilliant to get involved in, and whether that was on price or service quality or our customer offer, we did a good job over the years. But then that latterly needed to evolve, and so that was when the Sheffield Bus Partnership was born in 2012, and that in its own right was just such a huge piece of work and something really good to get involved in, because it had so many aspects to it. It was quite unique at the time, an ability for us to lock in a meaningful partnership with the other operators, mostly First, but also with the City Council and the PTE, not just a case of improving a few bus stops and some ticketing. This was, and it's pertinent today with the bus service improvement plans that have come out of the National Bus Strategy, but this was a real forerunner to a deep partnership across a whole host of different initiatives, whether it was connected to punctuality and bus priority on the roadside, proper partnership with integrated ticketing, and coordinated frequencies on the main corridors. And indeed, the whole network was set up in quite a detailed way that was brokered through the PTE and the City Council, so that the customer got something better than what was individually provided by the operators before this started. The big thing there was the art of compromise, though, because there were so many different partners involved. Came back to Stagecoach West as managing director in 2013, And for me, that just was the absolute dream job. To be a managing director, it was a tremendous experience, and the circumstances and the way that I was able to get back to Stagecoach West, a company that I obviously in my earlier point of my career I'd been heavily involved in, and I actually felt it quite liberating to be an MD. That I was happy with taking the responsibility, but it was great to be the business leader and set the strategy for the future, evolve the business, which was in really good shape when I took over, but evolve it and expand. And really for me, I could see how concession numbers were plateauing. We were starting to see some declines in that shopping market as internet shopping took hold. And so really at the early stages could see that we needed to diversify the business so that we could be stronger in the future. And that's where we looked at expansion into new types of services. So we tried something as an express coach service to Bristol, which was a complete and utter failure. It failed to attract enough people to make it commercially viable. But what it did do was open the door to talking to lots of stakeholders who were important in the west of England, the Bristol area. And that then led us to pick up tenders, and eventually we opened a depot in Bristol, and today we run around 100 vehicles out of the Bristol depot, a mixture of megabus coach services that run along the M4 corridor, but quite a significant number of contracts, local bus tenders, and some commercial services. So for example, one of the big things we do down there is we have a network of services to a huge Amazon distribution centre. And so at peak times, we have 20 vehicles involved in that contract. And those are routes that did not exist 5 years ago. And it's so satisfying to see that as part of the diversification. And particularly in the last 18 months, that sort of route has been pretty much a rarity as making a profit in this current age. And that, along with other initiatives we did across the business, meant that by the time I finished as MD last year, we'd grown the business, the revenue of the business, by 50% over 6 years, which is unusual given the backdrop around what else is going on in the last few years. And then the job I've been doing at the moment, which is a great insight to what else is going on and gives me an opportunity to get involved in the whole of the south of England. So this role covers everywhere from Plymouth across to Dover, and right up to Birmingham and Peterborough in the north as regional director for Stagecoach in the south region. And that's complete my journey for what has been 20 years in Stagecoach, as Jeff said at the introduction. So that's a little bit about me, but I did want to spend a long time today talking about COVID and what's happened to us, what we've done about that. Now, on my slides, some of the numbers are actually blocked out by the people's pictures and images. So I'm sorry about that if that's the same for you, but I'll explain what I wanted to talk about on this particular slide as I go through it. So if you can't see the numbers, I'll let you know about that. So, well, 18 months ago, lots and lots of questions, weren't there? How long was this going to go on for? We thought probably a month or two and it will be all okay. And as that went on, that turned into, well, as a business, how long can we last? And I remember my boss early on in probably in April 2020, she said success would be that we were still in business in a year's time. That was how critical the situation was for Stagecoach, because whilst we didn't have any doubt that government would want to make sure bus services continued, I have no doubt that government wouldn't have been bothered whether big PLCs failed. It was about making sure that the services to the customer continued. And of course, I'm sure some of you on this call were experts on furlough 18 months ago, but I had not heard of it. And boy, was that an experience understanding the rules of that and how those changed on what felt like a weekly basis. So, as I said, we didn't know how long this was going to go on for. And also at first, we just didn't know whether we'd get any government support. So we just went straight into crisis planning mode at the start of COVID. We cut mileage, we cut spending. We basically planned to protect cash flow. Anything that limited cash leaving the business, we worked around. And that included things that we'd not looked at before in that first few months. We looked at headcount. And for many of us, and I'm sure there's a fair few on this call that have worked in the bus industry, it's really unusual for us to go through a period of redundancy. And whilst we've been able to protect frontline jobs, we did have a process where we did make some underutilized central roles redundant. Actually, about 20% of central headcount was let go in summer 2020. And for us as a business, that was a really tough thing to do, because you join the bus industry, you don't expect that's something that people go through. One of the key numbers, which you may or may not be able to see on the slide, is that passenger numbers by the end of March 2020 had fallen 90% in Stagecoach in the South Division, which is just extraordinary how that collapsed, not unexpectedly given the lockdown. So we were carrying about 10% of normal, and we'd got the route network was concentrated on making sure that the key destinations that the government wanted to serve were still linked. So that focused on places like hospitals, essential services, mostly around shopping, those larger food stores that were able to continue to be open during that first lockdown. But we had to move fast. And thankfully, we had support from the traffic commissioners to allow us to make service changes. And some of those were made within 48 hours of those lockdowns being announced, which is a great credit to the commercial teams that we've got, that we were able to move so fast and so swiftly. And that led on to things like mothballing the fleet, which we've not been through before, in a process of parking up. And we cut the amount of fleet that we were using by nearly 60%. And route mileage fell by about 55%. So generally, commercial services we reduced by 60%. But the route mileage didn't fall as fast because most local authorities wanted us to keep running the tendered network, and we also had some contract services like the Amazon ones in Bristol that we just kept on going at that normal level. And indeed, Amazon, with that huge growth in retail via the internet, they just wanted more and more buses. And because we needed to have social distancing on buses, and even a double decker was limited in that early in the first year to 20, 25 people, we had a situation where we were able to run sometimes 3 times as many buses as we would normally do on those Amazon contracts, just to make sure we kept social distancing and carried everyone that needed to travel to their distribution centre. I mean, I have to say I felt it was quite a scary time, because we'd got lots of unanswered questions. People were becoming very unwell. There were sadly a number of people who worked in our local businesses that have lost their life as a result of COVID. And it really was a time that was quite tough. But what I saw was how resilient people were within Stagecoach, how everybody came together. You'll remember the sort of clap for heroes that used to happen on a Thursday evening, and we'd get some great stories from our drivers that they'd get clapped as they were keeping going during the pandemic, and going along in the same way that the NHS and other critical services were being congratulated for keeping going. But I know personally, I mean, it's great that I think I know that Gary Nolan, who invited me to do this course, said that your attendances on the meetings has been even greater because of being able to do it digitally online without people needing to go to a particular meeting place. So that's been one benefit that's come out from this. But it's been quite tough, particularly last year, where lots of my team were needing to work remotely, away from that social contact with people, which we needed to do. But it could be quite isolating, particularly if you perhaps lived on your own and you were you were having to work and live in the same four walls day in, day out. And of course, the other tough thing was that we'd all hear about policy from Boris at tea time. That was it, always the Prime Minister's daily update. And we'd find out from him what was going to happen. Now, what normally happens whenever we make changes in the bus companies is you get a plan together, you draw up a communication plan, how you're going to tell customers, how you're going to tell the staff what's happening, and you'd get time to plan for that. Whereas, of course, what was different during the pandemic, particularly in those early few months, is that Boris would appear on the TV and he'd say, right, we're going into lockdown tomorrow, or this rule's changing tomorrow. And immediately on our staff intranet, which we've got, you'd get drivers within minutes saying, well, what does that mean for us? And you'd get customers writing to you on Twitter, what does that mean for us? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? And so we had to adapt our decision making. And so we quite often have team meetings planned immediately after Boris's announcements. We'd then make sure we were communicating with our staff. And it would be quite common for us to work quite late into the evenings in order to get those plans communicated and shared, because we didn't get any tip off about what was going to happen, what was going to be government policy ahead of anyone else. We were learning to adapt and, to a certain extent, make it up as we go along, because there wasn't a plan on the shelf for how to deal with this situation. Okay. I think hopefully this slide, certainly for me, it's a bit clearer with the numbers. The video images I've got aren't showing up, blocking the slides here. But what this shows is how really summer 2020 was quite a false recovery for us. We all had that optimism that restrictions were being lifted as we went through the summer. So we went into the different stages and the tier system and the gradual opening of the country, so that by August, the message was pretty much return to normal, apart from a bit of mask wearing and trying to keep social distancing. But it really was a false recovery. But you can see on here how the percentage of customers that we were carrying on our services, where in May 2020 we were about 12%, and that crept up to June where we were about 20%, July peaking, going up again, August getting up to 40%, and then September we were actually at 55% of normal customers using services. And you can also see on there how we brought back people off furlough. So at one stage we had over half the people in Stagecoach were actually on furlough, and by September 2020 that was down to about 5% as we increased mileage levels, and we actually got by September 2020 back to 90% of normal mileage. And just as those different lockdown unwindings occurred during summer 2020, we, as you can see on there, we gradually brought people back and increased mileage. And we all thought that, okay, it's been a few tough months, but it's now going to be fine. We'll be able to get back to normal, and by the autumn it will be a normal country. And boy, that was just way off the mark, wasn't it? We also saw some really good other positives. Our staff turnover during 2020 dropped to the lowest we've ever seen it, less than 10%. But there was definitely a bit of a change as we got into the autumn, where we saw a lot more people decide to retire from the bus industry. That we were seeing twice the normal level of retirements, and we put that down to the fact that people didn't want to take that risk coming back to work, and had probably, if they'd been on furlough, had reassessed what they wanted to do with their own lives. And of course, one of the other elements we had to bear in mind is that there were different categories of people that were needing to isolate. So we had something called critically extremely vulnerable members of staff, and that they were prioritized for furlough. We had other members of staff that had potential symptoms that, if they'd caught COVID, could have meant that they would have been much more badly affected by catching COVID, and so they were kept off work, and that was where we had priority lists for those that would remain on furlough. And the other thing, as the numbers of people increased on buses, we had to put in place a lot of effort around some of the restrictions, not just in our own workplaces where we had to come up with one-way systems, we had meeting room limits, we had office limits, we had to get temporary canteen facilities in place. So in the summer, it was relatively easy to use some spare buses and get some temporary tables and things in there. But as it came round to winter, we needed to get more proper purpose-built facilities in place. And in some places, that was a big space constraint for us. We had to stop people having food in canteens because we were having the same restrictions as cafes and restaurants, that you couldn't sit in and eat a meal. So that was a tough thing, even though people were still needing to come to work. Still lots of people working from home. We had to cope with the mask wearing and the frustrations for our frontline staff that had to police all these things, because the government had given this message that, well, it's not the police to do it. It's something for the operators to have to police. And that's a tough thing when you're a lone worker on a bus and your normal job is to collect the fares, interact with the customers in a nice, polite way, and make sure the bus is there safely. And suddenly they've got these extra responsibilities, and that was a really tough thing for them. And is something that we've noticed as a business has got a bit harder over time, because during those early stages, as I said, we had the clap for heroes, and bus drivers were part of that. And then as soon as they turned into the mask police, it became a tougher message for them. And the other big change for us as a business is that, and this has been a really good positive for us, is that we've completely improved our cleaning processes on vehicles. I'd be the first to admit that before COVID, we were pretty average at best in terms of vehicle cleanliness. And we now spend about 300% more time cleaning vehicles. To give you an idea, most of our depots employ 3 times as many cleaners as we did before the pandemic. So that's one big positive, and that's something that we're really committed to keeping going, because we see the positive feedback from it. And it's a shame that it's something like COVID that has convinced us to do that, but it's a really important element of giving that customer reassurance as we see the light, hopefully, at the end of the tunnel of COVID. And of course, the other element we've had to contend with is those government messages in 2020, which almost said, if you use a bus, you're going to die after catching COVID. And so we've got a lot of negative PR to undo as a bus industry, on top of the legacy that we had before, and that stigma of using the bus. So then, as we went into the winter time, clearly that meant more lockdowns, very frustrating period, which at that point then caused a lot of frustrations amongst frontline staff, because we had quite a series of different lockdowns. Sometimes they were short, sometimes they were long, and they were different in different parts of the country. For example, with Stagecoach West, they run buses into Wales, and so they had to deal with different devolved governments as well, which brought its own challenges in terms of dealing with those different local variations in terms of what you could do or couldn't do, whether that was social distancing on the bus, or indeed that message about avoiding travel altogether. And at that time, that's when we started to see staff absence really increase, because we were still expected to provide about 90% of normal mileage. And at various stages during the winter, we were seeing in excess of 10% of our frontline staff being off work through COVID or through isolating because they've been pinged. We all remember the pingdemic and all that came with that. And and whilst it's probably a trivial, less interesting point, the government have made more than a dozen different changes to how sick pay should be calculated during the last year. And that's something that just those people dealing with payroll have had to get their head around. And of course, that frustrates staff because we're communicating things in a way that they wouldn't normally need to fret about. And then, don't get me wrong, there's been some really good positives. I mean, the picture there, that's a vaccination bus. So people come along to that and they can get their vaccination. And we've got countless examples of those all around the country. And we've also been really good at reacting to local authority requests, providing new services that deliberately link those vaccination centres and in some case COVID testing centres. And that's been great to show how we can react as a business to those local requests. But it was a really uncertain winter. The optimism that we'd had in the summer, it suddenly really did feel that it's going to be quite a long way to get back to pre-COVID levels of customer usage. At certain points during the winter, we were at less than half customer demand. And the longer this was going on, the harder it was going to be, particularly with those government messages of avoiding buses and other transport. It was going to be really hard to get that back. And would we ever see 100% of normal usage? At that point last winter, getting to 80% seemed really optimistic. And we just need to see how it would pan out. The spring did bring some really good positives. So we know just before COVID, the government had prepared something as a national bus strategy, but because of COVID, it was put off. And when the national bus strategy came out in March this year, I mean, we think it's a great opportunity. I think 90% of what's in there is going to be really, really helpful. And anyone who's been around the bus industry for some time will know that this is probably the first time since the late 90s when there was a real effort to try and do something about improving the lot of the bus and that proper government messaging to support bus with proper funding. And we are now seeing the fruits of some of those aspects at the moment. And I'll talk about where we are with the bus service improvement plans and the recovery funding. But what we particularly like about Bus Back Better is the partnerships that should be meaningful. Lots of us have been involved in partnerships where what tends to happen is the local authority makes some promises, maybe in a voluntary way, the operators make promises. Let's say then the operator gets on, invests in new vehicles, but the local authority doesn't find a way forward to invest in that bus priority. And it leaves a bit of a sour taste when it doesn't feel that it's meaningful. Indeed, and Bus Back Better highlights it, there are some places around the country where partnerships have worked really well, and it's great to see those examples given here, because that then helps, we hope, influence those other local authorities that this can be done. And the key thing for us is that the funding needs to match that ambition within the paper. The £3 billion pot over the next few years is absolutely vital, not just to doing the things that pre-COVID were right, but for helping to bridge that gap, because we've got a long way to go to get from the sort of volumes of people we're carrying at the moment and getting back to that pre-COVID recovery. It's also great in there around the ticketing and the technology and how we can better join that up. Really pleased about how the environment plays centre stage, because that is a huge challenge for us. In Stagecoach, we have some great examples of where we have put in electric vehicles and we've tried other fuel sources, but they are so expensive And I'll give you an example. In Cheltenham, we looked at a scheme before COVID hit. It was just involving 14 single deck vehicles. If we had bought conventional diesel vehicles for those routes, it would have cost us £2.3 million. To run that same 14 vehicles as wholly electric, it would have cost us £5.5 million. So not even double, it was more than double the amount of money. And part of that was the local electricity infrastructure around our Cheltenham depot. We were actually needing to effectively buy our own substation because there just wasn't enough power in the local network. And so we'd have this situation where the 14 buses would be plugged in at night, and nobody in that part of Cheltenham would have been able to boil their kettle or watch Coronation Street, which wouldn't have gone down particularly well. But it just highlights some of the fact that this really does need to be thought about. It isn't just a simple case of buying an electric bus and plugging it in at the end of the day. There's a whole piece of work around the infrastructure as part of that. And it's going to be really exciting driving forward the electric bus city that we're working with Travel for West Midlands in Coventry. The work there is quite well advanced. And we've also got some good conversations going on in Oxford around the city network there and how that can be converted to electric vehicles. So part of the National Bus Strategy was around how we could recover from COVID. And so my teams all around the region at the moment are working flat out with local authority partners on the bus service improvement plans. So these are an absolute requirement that we need to have with every local authority, every local transport authority. And I've looked through about 40 drafts that we've had so far. And these are absolutely key because they are going to be the pledge between the operator and that local authority to secure funding. They're going to be key to what we're going to promise as a business and what the local authority is going to promise as a business. And effectively, they are a pledge to government that if you give us X amount of money, we will deliver these elements. And then we need to wait, once those have been submitted to the Department for Transport, we'll then wait to see what funding comes from that. And then those answers will shape the enhanced partnerships, which would be legally binding schemes that we'd want to introduce with the transport authorities from April next year. So we're not quite there yet with all of them. There's some really good examples and there's some that need a bit more work. But we absolutely need these things. And some of the great ones are talking about how we can use some of this funding to help discount tickets, to help introduce tap in, tap out ticketing across larger networks, and also bus priority measures to properly deliver journey time savings and all of that will go together to help get more people back onto buses. We're still in a point where there's a few question marks about what will happen in April next year. We have some funding from government that is designed to help bridge some of the gap between the lost revenue and the existing revenue that we're taking. But that will finish at the end of March with the bus service improvement plans and the enhanced partnerships kicking in from that point. But they all assume that we get to about 90% of pre-COVID passenger numbers and income. I'm not sure everywhere's going to get to that level yet. And to give you an indication, I've just literally within the last day put together these latest numbers that we've got. And apologies if you can't see to the right of the graph, but it just shows how this year we've got that, what I feel is a genuine recovery. So back in May, we were at less than 60% of pre-COVID passenger journeys to the point where, and this is at a regional level, so this is an average across the whole of the South region in Stagecoach, we're seeing at the moment, we're about that 77-78% mark. So still some way to go, but there's some really positive signs. And what's interesting is that we've seen a bit of a spike in demand since the fuel crisis and the higher fuel prices over the last couple of weeks. It's really noticeable, particularly in the southeast, which, according to the news outlets at least, is an area that has suffered more than most with panic buying and the way that people have been with purchasing fuel for their cars. But it is very mixed. And to give you an example, in my patch, we've got some places that are still around that 60% mark. And those places tend to be where we tend to rely on lots of park and ride services, where there are lots of offices that have blue collar workers, professional services, that sort of thing, where it's evidence that they're still working from home. So an example of that would be somewhere like Cambridge. Whereas networks that are a bit more focused on younger people, so schools, colleges, universities, we're seeing 85-86% usage, which is obviously much stronger. And what's been fascinating, particularly over the summer, and there's some places, and I'll quote Torquay here, we were at 95% of normal during the school summer holidays, simply because, as you can appreciate, lots of tourists not able to go outside the UK, they've flocked to to Torbay, and we've seen some really good numbers down there. But equally, the traffic congestion has been really scary. So still some way to go. And what's not clear is, at an average level, we have a good confidence that the BSIPs and recovery funding will mean that we'll be very close. But of course, that's not much good if you've got a network that's still at 60 or 70%. And of course, it's from a Stagecoach point of view, we are a network operator in towns and cities up and down the country. But if you are a small or medium-sized enterprise and you run in a particular area that is doing poorly, you need a bit more help. There's a bit more to take into account before you can get there. So there's things that certainly CPT and DFT are talking about in terms of how we can bridge some of that gap beyond March 2022. That was all the slides I had, and I know Jeff promised that there would be plenty of time for questions. I hope that's a good run through of where Stagecoach has got to with COVID, and a bit of instruction from me, and I'll pull these slides off sharing so that I can see people, and let Jeff decide who gets to put me on the spot.
Okay, we're back together again. Okay, fine. Rupert, thank you very much for that. That's an excellent summary of the ups and downs of COVID. I think you've covered practically every aspect that one could think of. One of the things that I've been looking at is the speed of response. I mean, it's absolutely amazing that as an old bus man, that we can actually do these things so quickly with traffic commissioners' approval, obviously. And some of the schedulers I speak to, well, okay, they've probably earned a bit of overtime, but they haven't half put the hours in. So quite a good mark, I think, for the industry, which I hope message is going through upstairs somewhere, because by golly, we need all the good points we can get, I think, as we go into this April 22 situation. Quite scary. Interesting, incidentally, that we at some stage in our careers, some distance apart, I have to say, we've both been responsible for old Swindon Depot.
Ah, right.
Something we share in common. And still, I would hope, still a profitable place as it was when I was there.
Yes, although we were able to move into new depot facilities about 5 years ago, because the old Eastcott Road site that you would have recalled was we'd just outgrown it, and Swindon today runs about 80 vehicles from their depot, which is now in Cheney Manor, which is a far more appropriate facility. So Swindon has seen a lot of change over the years, particularly with the interurban market.
Yes, it's good. Somebody obviously in the pioneering days of the 20s thought, let's go and stick a Bristol flag in Swindon, which they did, albeit 42 miles from the head office in those days. So interesting that survived right through to being, I think, probably in Swindon, quite a good example of joint cooperation between what is now two big groups rather than a corporation and yourselves. So yeah, good point. Sorry, I mustn't monopolize it. What I would like to do now is, with Rupert's permission, throw open to questions. If you put your electronic hand up, I think that would be a super way of doing it. Let's try and keep it orderly, chaps, if we can. And so the first hand I see up is Anthony D. Anthony, do you want to go ahead with your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much for an interesting presentation. In terms of the Bus Back Better funding, if that only lasts for 3 years, how important or how difficult will it be to put on extra services that are sustainable beyond the 3 years?
It will be really challenging, Anthony, but we've got a good track record as an industry, and it was something that I remember pioneering back in my early days in Stagecoach West with the Kickstart funding that came about in the era of sort of 2005 to 2007, where we were able to make a really good case for services to get improvements, and that sort of seed corn funding, where you'd get a bit more in year one, and you'd then hope and market it so that you could get the growth, so that by year 2 the funding would drop a little, and again in year 3 the funding would drop a little bit, and that tapered approach. And so I do believe that is the right way to try it. But of course, we all also can point to examples where there have been services that have been tried and the money's run out after 3 years and the service has stopped. And the main thing from my point of view is that we need to try things, and we need to be open to react to services that don't work so well and how we can finesse them further. And equally, there'll be things that need to be tried that will do really well. And as a bus industry, where I'm encouraged is that we need to get back to trying things. Despite COVID and the challenges it's brought, we need to get back to trying things and finding a way to encourage people to use the bus.
Yeah, thanks, Rupert. Okay, with that one, Anthony, can we move on then to Peter Shelley? Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Rupert. Thank you for a fascinating presentation. I'm now with Portsmouth City Council. Look forward to working with you down there. And your local team has been very good on BSIP. If we all succeed as we hope to, what are Stagecoach's plans to increase the capacity of its fleet, either with more buses or larger vehicles?
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I mean, Portsmouth is going to be, there's a lot of really exciting things on the horizon. Even before COVID, the Transforming Cities Fund in itself, that's going to be fantastic for developing the services that we run to Lee Park, I think it is. It's and I haven't seen all of the draft BSIP for the city, but I know from talking to the guys down there that it's a place that we see a bright future for buses, and our Portsmouth depot is one of our best run and managed facilities, and there is plenty of room to grow and for us to do more.
Good.
Okay, Rupert. Nice to think about possible fleet increases. That's something that hadn't struck me until until Peter mentioned it. But by golly, we ought to be ready for that one, didn't we? Excellent. Okay, Peter Heath now, please. Unmute, Peter. You have. You have. Go ahead. Peter, sorry, I think you've got a mic problem there. You are unmuted according to my thing, but we can't hear you. Can you fiddle around with a bit? Yeah, as you said. We'll go on to Chris Mills now, and if Peter can get back, fine. Christopher, over to you.
Yes, just a small point. I was recently back in my home area of East Kent, and I noticed that the gold buses are now painted in the new type livery. Are you going to withdraw the gold buses? I thought this was probably a niche market that was quite popular.
I suppose I ought to be reasonably diplomatic as this has been recorded. I am a huge fan of the gold product. It's the upgraded spec of vehicles. I think it's really important on the right sort of route, the interurban route, the better facilities targeting those that perhaps have a choice of whether they've got a car at home, but potentially new developments, that sort of thing. And in my time at Stagecoach West, we got a lot of growth from doing more and more services that have that level of vehicle. But over the last 18 months, as a group, we've wanted to do a new brand, and that's included a new livery. And so there is still a bespoke livery for those services that have a higher spec vehicle, which is that sort of yellow and metallic-y gold colours together. So the vehicle specs are still there, they're just in a different colour. And I think it's one of the shames that COVID has brought to us, is that new brand was launched back in February 2020, and there was a lot of things. It wasn't just about changing the livery of the vehicles, but it's meant that those plans that involved a lot of investment have had to be paused, and will have to be reassessed when the market is right for us to invest a lot more in that strategy.
Okay, thanks, Rupert. Yeah, can I take Peter? You put thumbs up now or not? No.
Hopefully, can you hear me?
Yes, go.
Good.
Yep.
Don't never fiddle with the settings in Microsoft. I mean, an observation. You commented about Cambridge as a frequent user of Trumpington Park and Ride. I mean, it's interesting. Whereas sort of 2 years ago, you were talking about a park and ride site of about 1,200 capacity that was full by 10 o'clock, and I mean now it's round about sort of 40% capacity. Just a question. I mean, in terms with most other retail, have you noticed that the amount of hard cash taken on buses has dwindled now, with most people either paying in advance or paying by some other means than cash? And I mean, do you think that's going to continue?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a really good point that I didn't mention through the presentation, that part of our mitigation for drivers in the early part of the pandemic was to really promote contactless and app payments. And at one point, we were only taking something like 10% of our normal cash takings, even when we had half our customers back. And so cash has actually reduced by about 2/3 at the moment. And you'll appreciate that we're actually seeing near normal levels of school children traveling, and that's a fair amount of the cash transactions. But yeah, cash is well down. Contactless has had quite a boom. That was something we were already prepared for across every single bus. But also app ticket sales have done really well. And there are spin-off benefits to that, because it's meant that drivers have spent less time paying in money that is being collected at the end of the day. And also that we are noticing that that's helped speed up boarding times, because there's less transaction time on the doorstep. There's a lot more that we can do in that area, and that's where I think tap on, tap off investment will come, and that's one of the big things that we're pushing in the BSIP conversations with the transport authorities, because that will help.
Thank you, Rupert. Good. Coming up on the list now, we've got Mike. Mike, go please. No, unmute. Unmute, Mike.
Yes, I've done it. Yes, I've got there. I forgot initially. Thank you, Rupert, for a wonderful, a really nice, a good presentation. How are you finding on the bus service improvement plans that you're getting a decent level of response from local authorities? Because I mean, I was aware leading up to this that the local authorities' feelings about bus services, or at least dedication to bus services, differed greatly across the country. Are you getting some that are just paying some sort of lip service to it without much involvement, or are you getting a reasonable level from all the local authorities, or a majority even?
I think the positive is that all local authorities are engaging properly in the process, but there are some that are producing really exciting transformative plans and proposals. And I mean, I'll use Peter Shelley was asking a question. Portsmouth, they're up there with one of the better proposals. Not a surprise there. And his former employee, Hampshire County Council, really excited by what they're proposing. But yeah, there are some that lack a bit of ambition, because this is about really making a difference. We've got to improve bus priority. We've got to make serious changes. It's not just good enough anymore to say we want to make some bus stop improvements and put some new flags on bus stops. It needs to be, this is a once in a generation opportunity to get government funding to really make the experience for customers much better. And we're up for that challenge. But yeah, some are, to use your phrase, Mike, it's lip service to the process, and that's a worry for us.
Thank you.
Yes, Mike, I share that concern actually, because certainly in the Midlands there's quite a large variance between how authorities have responded, and I think I'm not sure about your old authority, but certainly Staffordshire. Okay, it's taken some steps, but I find that they haven't got the people involved in the making the plan, if you like, or talking to the bus operators that they used to have. It's all been cut down, and we understand why it's been cut down. But the danger is that some local authorities have certainly got less expertise in public transport network planning and so on than they had before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, the government did their best, I think, to help with announcing this pot of money that local authorities could bid for to help fund consultants and things, because yeah, there are some local authorities where the transport team had got down to one or two key people, and so they needed that boost and help. But yeah, we're still struggling with some places where they haven't picked up the phone to get some external help to unlock this, what is a massive piece of work, and that's a shame.
Yes, agreed. Let's hope that they haven't got long to improve, have they? But let's hope they do.
No.
Right, Mike. Okay, can we move over to Brendan? I've got somebody waving at me, but David, could you electronically raise your hand? Press the button a minute. I'll come to you in a minute. Or are you on fire or something? Is there some problem down there? Okay, forget that. Brendan, fire away.
All right, it's Brendan Fox from Peterborough. Hello, thank you for your presentation. As a member of the public, I was wondering, are these BSIPs going to be published in the public domain? And if so, where can we find them? And also, is there any element of public consultation involved in the timescale?
Really good points. So the BSIPs are effectively a wish list to government that I know that each council, certainly the ones I've been aware of, are running that through their full members, their full membership. So they're consulting on that within the council. But I don't think at the moment there's been any discussion about how that then would be shared with members of the public. But I'd expect there to be a degree of consultation with members of the public when it comes to the enhanced partnership making, because at the moment it's a request for funding to government. We don't know yet, depending on the scale of ambition across England, what that will mean in terms of funding then coming back to each individual local authority for making the initiatives within that possible.
Right, thank you.
Okay, Ben, I think we can all guess what there'll be a difference probably between the bids and the what's available, but that's up to Grant Shapps, I suppose, and others to actually address that issue. He'll be there to answer the awkward questions, hopefully. Okay, political comment. Sorry, not allowed on the OS. Can I move to? Can I just ask David Wootton to say his piece, and then we'll go back to the proper queue in a minute. David. No, you're still muted. No. Right, you're not muted now. Come on. No, you've got a mic problem. Okay, Richard Delahoy, you're on.
Thanks very much for a very interesting talk. I wanted to expand again on this theme of the B6 and the deliverability. What worries me or concerns me is at the moment all the discussions are primarily officers, not vendors, although some councils are doing that. I can see a situation developing where we get to the point where a plan is put forward that involves bus priority, involves bus safety and so on. Those then have to be voted in by the local councillors. But local councillors will typically say, oh, this is going to lose us votes because people don't want bus lanes down their road. You can see a situation where the plan is good, but it's incapable of being delivered. And actually the industry ends up worse off, perhaps gets withheld government funding. And I think I recall reading somewhere that even BSOL might be can't actually be implemented. So is that, I mean, certainly my hometown is Southend. If you go back
Richard, you've obviously got a mic problem there.
Yeah, I think I got most of the point, and there were two key elements. It was the concern about bus priority, which is one that I share, and I was fortunate enough to be invited by DfT to help shape the framework that local authorities will complete for when it comes to getting the funding. And the advice I think is going to go out to local authorities that don't be too specific about the bus priority measure, i.e. don't say, well, it's going to go from outside number 101 to outside number 150. It's more about trying to concentrate on what journey time savings you could unlock on a corridor. So it's not too specific, because I absolutely, and I've been the victim of this myself, where you think you've got a really good scheme, it goes to local consultation, and the NIMBYs don't want that to happen in their area, and it doesn't happen. And so that is a big risk with all of these schemes, which is why I think it's important that we have the range of measures. There isn't a magic bullet for one thing. We've got to make sure that there's bus priority, there's ticket initiatives, there's other partnership initiatives in there. It's not just one element, so that if something doesn't work, that doesn't mean that the whole plan falls in that local authority area. And it's going to take political will and political bravery. But what I also am confident of, that every local authority up and down the land has signed up to this net carbon zero. They've got no policies in many of these places to actually deliver it. And this could be one of the areas that will help them get some serious kudos by having schemes that reduce carbon and help solve that challenge they've got. Richard also asked about BSOG. So yes, there is a big DfT piece of work at the moment to have a look at possible changes, and that's something that happens fairly regularly. what we are hearing is that there won't be any structural change to BSOG until at least April 2023, which gives us a bit of certainty for next year, but we are hoping that they'll introduce a better level of BSOG for electric vehicles from April 22, and that might be more akin to the Scottish scheme, where perversely you're not penalised for running an electric vehicle, because at the moment actually the sums don't stack up very well from a commercial point of view. You lose BSOG on diesel, but you don't get any BSOG for running an electric vehicle. So I think that's something that we will see introduced from April 22.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Rupert. Right, I think Jim, you're next. Don't forget to. That's right, you've done it.
Yes, I've remembered to unmute. Yes, thank you, Rupert. I've been involved with both city and county, city and county as a bus user group rep with BSIPs. As far as I'm aware, most of them are now going to council committees or cabinets, and they are appearing on local council websites. I also understand that while groups were consulted, general public consultation comes in the next stage as the enhanced partnerships come up with some more details. The other point, which to some extent you've mentioned in reply to Richard, is that some of the versions that I've now looked at locally seem to be fairly general. But I note interesting that the city seems to be more, which is all commercial, is much more infrastructure, whereas the county is looking more to services and fares. Are you finding that elsewhere?
Yeah, and it won't surprise you that the transport authorities that are most well funded and have more people, so for example Transport for West Midlands, I think the package of measures that they've got in mind that they're going to ask for come to about £1 billion. Now clearly they're not going to get all of that, but you can't fault their ambition, and I think that's true, that the authorities that are best set up tend to be the most ambitious, have the most exciting plans. But that's not the whole story. But yeah, I agree with your first points. I think that is the general setup that we're seeing, that they should be published, but there isn't consultation at this stage because it's more of a funding request, and that will come as we move to the formation of the enhanced partnerships next year. Sorry, I think the one exception is probably in the combined authority area of Peterborough and Cambridge, where there is talk of having a franchise bus service, and that would have a separate consultation as part of whether that happens or not. And I think that could run either in parallel or in advance of the enhanced partnership proposals over there.
Okay, interesting times ahead, aren't there? Certainly, this public consultation thing, my understanding from Staffordshire is that will take place after they almost put it to bed, which seems a bit wrong to me. It's good to see from Peter Shelley that Portsmouth haven't quite done it that way. They've done it what I call the right way, consult the public first. But there we are. This is how things progress. Okay, looking at the queue, I've got Derek Jones now, please.
Hello, Rupert. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I'm now in Kent, but was previously in Hampshire and Portsmouth, and at various stages worked with and for Peter Shelley. So interesting overlap from people who are now in different parts of the country. But I just wanted to add to what's been said about this initial stage of BSIP applications. The part of the problem has been the short time scale in which it's all been telescoped into, and I think we've done our best to both go along with the process and get the objective, which is basically getting some funding to be able to do something useful in the coming year or so. And 3 years is a useful sort of stage to work to. But I think there's a lot more which can be done once the enhanced partnerships are up and running and are coming up with some more detail. And I think that's the stage that we'll be able to consult with people. And I just wondered whether you feel that there will be a way for local authorities and operators to converge in what they're planning, so that they work in sync. That's going to be different depending on which authority you're working with, because all authorities tend to have their own policies depending on the personalities that lead them.
Yeah, it is a constraint, and we understand that everyone is pushed, and I know that some stagecoach operating companies, they're needing to deal with 7 or 8 different significant transport authorities. So it is a tremendous workload. And whilst the DFT have been very definite about 31st of October being the cutoff, I would hope that there is, and I'm sure there needs to be some flex once we know what the funding allocation is likely to look like, because I'm sure that in lots of places it will be oversubscribed, and there will need to be a degree of change. And equally, because of the timescales, where it's frustrating is that we know a couple of local authorities are working with parallel ones. But things like the tap in, tap out technology, what we don't want is everybody going off and doing their own thing. We want something that's joined up, and that's the sort of thing that we'd hope DFT sees some sense in trying to broker across multiple local authorities.
So in some sense, it's a matter of bridging the gap between the existing funding, the recovery funds, which will be one-offs, and then the ongoing funding for new projects.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think it does need that mix to make sure that vital services and commercial services keep going, whilst there is still uncertainty at what demand's going to be like next year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Here's the one you've been waiting for, Rupert. Gary Nolan.
Well, I'm not going to say anything to that one, Jeff. But it's quite obvious who's Rupert who's been mentoring Rupert over the last few years. You've certainly done well out of it. Just a couple of things. One about public consultation. The BSIP says that there has to be some sort of research, public research, and what some BSIPs have done is relied on transport focus results, and others have relied on their own historic customer surveys that have been done by local authorities. It's worth remembering, and I agree entirely with you on the point of ambitions and operators doing things and delivering things, but local authorities thinking, we can't really do that. And I was involved in the first EP in Sheffield, where we had ourselves as the operator wanting to do things, agreeing to do things, South Yorkshire PTE saying, yeah, we want to do that as well, and the City Council of the Highway Authority saying, not so sure we can do our bit. And it took many years to get the Barnsley Road corridor sorted, but eventually it did get sorted. But it's worth pointing out that BSIP is the sort of bidding mechanism, and the EP is the delivery mechanism. And EPs aren't voluntary. So whatever is agreed has to go ahead, because it then becomes a legally binding partnership rather than a voluntary partnership. So I welcome, I've never been in favour of EPs, because it's always been considered to be franchising through the back door. But if that's the alternative and that's the only way to get the funding, and it ties local authorities in, then it ticks the box for me. But yeah, excellent speech, Rupert. You've covered everything that I wanted to hear, and I really feel for you. I know what it's like locally here, where a certain commercial director tells me that he's got 9 LTAs to deal with, and it's not easy. They're all different, and a lot of them, certainly one north of the Humber where you used to work, they've now only got one transport officer who's struggling. So yeah, excellent. Well done. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Gary. And let's not forget, I mean, when was the latest Bus Services Act introduced? Was it 2017? And I know of Hertfordshire have an enhanced partnership that was made, and it's no surprise that there wasn't a big queue before the National Bus Strategy of others that had done so. And so we all know, whether it's local authority or operator, that it's not easy, and it's going to take some effort and compromise to get there.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Gary. That's a good input. I think we've now got David Wootton. Certainly got his hand up. Can you hear us, David? No. Okay. Next on the list, Michael Milton. Go ahead, please.
Right, can you hear me, Jeff?
No problem.
Right, Rupert. Can I raise the other elephant that's in the room these days, with Boris getting everybody to become lorry drivers rather than bus drivers? Couple of things here. Do you foresee you're going to have to get to the stage where you're going to be reduced in service levels so you can provide reliable services for people? And have you got a crystal ball to say how it will actually all end?
I'd love that a crystal ball. Has anyone on here got the crystal ball I can borrow? It's yeah, and yeah, I am denied about mentioning that, because there is no doubt that it's the number one issue for us. It's overtaking COVID. It's overtaking the recovery. I think we've already in various towns and cities put in place reduced service levels because we don't have the number of drivers that we need. We've seen since July, the turnover across Stagecoach has pretty much doubled. And no matter what recruitment plan you have in place, you are not going to keep pace with that over such a short period of time. What is encouraging, though, is, and I think we're at the peak in terms of the worst of it, what's encouraging is that the number of people joining us as new trainees isn't showing any sign of worsening. We're getting more and more people interested, but we've just seen this huge turnover. And for some of you that remember it as part of my presentation, last year we saw a record low turnover. And I think there's an element where people were nervous about changing jobs last year. And I've certainly seen in the news media recently, they actually have a name for this period of time we're going through. It's the Great Resignation. It's the good news is, I suppose, the encouragement is it's not just Stagecoach, it's not just the bus industry. Lots of industries are really struggling with people. Some say it's Brexit. Some say it's COVID. One thing sure, at the moment, we suffer because we can't take somebody off the street and then stick them in a bus the next day. There's a period of training, rightly so. There's a period of getting people used to the job before they actually become a solo driver. And I think we'll get over this hurdle, but it's going to be really tough. And many of you on this call will remember working in the early 2000s, the late 90s, when parts of the country were in a similar situation where there was huge turnover in the bus industry. And we had to change practices to get people in, whether that was pay rates had to change, whether that was duties and rotas, we had to be more family friendly. And so there's a whole measure of things that we're working on at the moment. But the positive is that we are seeing a really good number of people wanting to come and join us and at various stages of training at the moment. So I do think this is it's a sharp shock to the system, but we will get over it. And whilst it will take some time because of the time it takes to train people, I'm not sitting here thinking that this is something that's going to go on and on. But no, don't have that crystal ball.
I think it's interesting that Boris, in one hand, says pay the lorry drivers the going rate, improve their conditions and everything else. On the other hand, if you start doing too much of that in the bus industry, who's paying for a lot of it? Well, it's Boris himself.
Yeah, exactly. and let's yes, we've had some people, some drivers, and all around the country we've had drivers that have left to go to drive trucks, but that's not a new thing for us to deal with. There's been that before, and of course we're getting lots of people that perhaps tried truck driving in July and August, and it's not for them, and they've come back. So sometimes the grass isn't always greener, but there is that lure, as what we read in the media about truck drivers getting 50 grand a year. But it's not everybody's cup of tea, in the same way that we have people that come to drive buses, and after a while it's not their thing either.
Well, I wish you well with it, but at least you're not alone, are you? It's everybody.
No. Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's that's encouraging news that the sort of recruitment of trainees hasn't slowed down or finished altogether. It's good news that people are still seeing the bus industry as a potential future career. That is good news. Excellent. While you've got that crystal ball, are you holding it or not? I can't remember whether you caught the crystal ball or not, but if you've got it, any comments on the takeover by National Express, or is that completely taboo at the moment, Rupert?
Well, we don't know. We don't know if it will definitely happen or not. We'll wait and see. There's not much really I can say that hasn't already been announced. It's a period of time when they're going to work through. But I mean, as a bus industry, every decade there have been ownership changes, and we'll just have to see what that brings. But yeah, it's definitely a period perhaps for a little bit of uncertainty. But I think for most people in Stagecoach, or indeed National Express, it will be business as usual, and no different whoever ultimately owns the company.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I mean, staff morale is one of the issues, isn't it, in both companies, basically, while the talks are going on. But there we are. This is, I think, the future of the industry is going to be fewer groups. Personally, might even get back to the National Bus Company if we go at that rate. Okay, I'm going to give David Wootton one more try. David, over to you. No, he's not. Okay, I'm moving on. John Lebeck, please. You're on.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for this evening. Just one comment in answer to some of what's gone before. I'm in Warwickshire, and there was an online survey from the County Council head of BSIP, so there was some work going on in preparation. But my main point is the longer term plans for information, and particularly non-online information for users and customers, passengers.
Yeah, it's a fair point, because I think in terms of bus services, that's one area that has, because of the huge frequency at which timetables have changed, there is no doubt that there have needed to be some compromises. And in lots of places, we're responsible for putting up information, and in lots of places, it's the local authority. And it's an area that, as we stabilize and the frequency of change reduces, and actually I'm a positive advocate of having fewer changes to services, and that's something that would be great to lock in as part of the BSIPs and the new enhanced partnerships, so that information and quality information can be done. Should we have timetables at every bus stop? I'm not convinced. I think we need to make sure that there is printed material available, and people have got a choice, depending on how comfortable they are with using timetables, roadside information, smartphones, and apps, and the website. We need that broad range of information available, but it has been really difficult, and I do feel sorry for someone that's standing at the side of the road thinking that they're looking at the most accurate timetable, but actually, because of a lockdown change or a timetable change, because we've been struggling for staff, it's not accurate, and it pains me when I see complaints from people who've suffered, and we need to, it's an area we need to improve at. That's one thing that is sure. I don't think there's many places around the country that can say they've got it tip top 100% on information.
Thank you.
Okay, John. Right, David, one last chance. Unmute. No, it's not. No, it's not going to happen. Okay, any more questions out there anywhere? In which case we can. Yes, Peter. Well done. Good evening, Peter. Over to you.
Right. Hello. Right. Hello. Yes, I enjoyed the talk. I suppose a follow-on from the last question that was raised. Are we seeing the death of the travel centre?
Yeah, it's
I know
a
it's
really
not only a
tough.
Stagecoach thing.
No, it isn't, and it's a fair question, because I know within Stagecoach that a number of travel shops have closed. Now, some of that was initially brought on by the desire that we could see people's habits had changed, and it was an area that we did make some cutbacks, particularly in summer 2020. And it really is a delicate balance, because they can be quite costly. I'm personally a fan of being able to talk to someone in real life rather than over the phone or interacting with a website, particularly if it means that they can also sell you something and be a personality or someone just to chat to in terms of there's a problem with the service. But there has been over the last year this focus on trying to take some of that cost out, and that's been one of the compromises that we've chosen to make as a business. I don't think the travel shop is completely dead. I know, for example, here where I live in Gloucester, we've still got that real person in the new bus station, where you can go and buy tickets, you can get information, you can get help and advice, and in many places that will continue to be really important as part of the customer experience.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Can you come back on that? You're okay, fine. Gary, you're coming back. Come back.
Yeah. I just wanted to show some support to Rupert. Many years ago, I think there was an instruction to close Chesterfield Travel Shop. And I remember the management team there were very reluctant to do it, and managed to tap up Derbyshire County Council for half of the running costs, so it stayed open. So well done, Rupert.
Thank you for your support, Gary. Yes, it's a bit worrying, isn't it, when even the local authority, I mean, here in West Midlands, starts to shut down travel centres. And they're responsible, as it were, in their metropolitan areas. That is really a worry. But I think I can weigh up the need to achieve economy, certainly. Right.
Yeah, it's been a tough one over the past 18 months, because there were many months where we legally wouldn't have been able to open the travel shop because it fell foul of the lockdown rules. So yeah, it really is a tough one.
Okay, don't let's end on a sad note. Let's end on the note that I really liked from you, which is the number of people still wishing to join the bus industry. Long may that be. That's brilliant news. Any more questions out there? No. Okay, I'm going to have to draw it to a close, and I think the presentation was excellent, Rupert, really excellent, and it showed us the awful journey that Stagecoach and all the others have made through the last couple of years, and it shows also that there's some green shoots of recovery, not in all areas, but certainly in many. So that's good news. The question session was even better in my view, because it brought out a number of issues that we've all been debating in various quarters, and I think your responses have given some encouragement that the process is in fact under control, and sometimes we think it's not. So yes, that was good. I think, gentlemen, we need to give Rupert our thanks, because that was a very honest and lengthy presentation. Could we show our appreciation in the normal way, please?
Thank you.
Thank you, Rupert. Very, very much appreciated. Your time is valuable, and I think that's something we all recognise, that we've had a good share of your time, and we thank you very much for
that. No problem at all. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good to meet you and see you and hear you. I think just a couple of notes to finish up on. I hope you enjoyed the meeting, everybody. We've got another one coming, our next Zoom meeting, and I think we're going to carry on with Zoom as a mixture between live meetings and Zoom, certainly in Midland branch, and we're going to see how that goes, because it stands to reason 80 people attending at various times tonight, compared with our normal branch attendance in Derby or Birmingham would be around 30, 35. And I think there's a bit of thinking to be done there, because what are we here for? We're here actually to help information come out to members and so on, and Zoom is certainly ahead of the other way of doing it. So a little bit of thought needed there. Next Zoom meeting then is on Tuesday, 16 November, when the man who's going to spend £1 billion, if you were listening, Pete Bond, who's Director of Integrated Transport Services for Transport for West Midlands, will come and explain, presumably, what he's going to spend £1 billion on. The title of the talk is West Midlands Vision for Bus. I like it. Hopefully here's another guy who's firmly fixed on surviving into the future, not just surviving, but growing and getting better. So tune in then, if you would mind, 16 November, the usual time, 1900, to see Pete Bond. I'm going to wind up now and say good night to everybody. Thank you so much for joining in. Those who haven't been able to communicate, I think there's been one or two, apologies, I'll talk to you later. But in the meantime, good night to everybody. Thank you, and see you again soon. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you. Cheers.
Good night.
Good night, all.